Hi there, and welcome to another one of my classic reviews where I pick up my all-time favourite movies, give it a rewatch and then come review it. And in this video I'm talking about the Phantom Carriage. So the Phantom Carriage is one of the earliest horror films. It comes from 1921 and it's a real fantastic film that holds up to this day, even though it was made so early in the history of cinema. It really does come at a very unique point in history, and it's a very fascinating work that holds up with depth, with ideas, with technical excellence. And although it's a little bit different to a lot of cinema now, it's very much a well-regarded film that I would say is fantastic. So the Phantom Carriage is made by Sjöström, who's best known for his performance in Wild Strawberries, the Ingmar Bergman film. However, Sjöström is really also a very well-respected silent director who made a whole bunch of movies in the 1910s and the 1920s, and he was very much a key innovator for Scandinavian cinema, and he led the way for that part of the world when they were making some of their best films in the late 1910s and early 1920s. The Phantom Carriage is his best known work. It's a horror movie, but it's also this deep meditation on love and happiness and death. And it's one of those films that is surprisingly complex for such a simple story, but it works really well. So the film is basically just this complex telling of a man who has lived a bad life and who on New Year's Eve he dies and death visits him, and he is shown his life in flashback and he's shown a bunch of stuff, and it's about this man learning about his own misdeeds. The Phantom Carriage is a film which is deeply moralistic. It's very much got a message, it's got a purpose. In fact, Sjöström only ever seemed to make films with a social conscience. You see this in a lot of his other films from the 1910s, and you see this as well in the Phantom Carriage, which has this very strong stance which is anti-drinking and anti-drunkenness, but is also very pro-family. It is very of its time in a lot of ways, because it certainly relies heavily on Christian morality, but at the same time it's also very much a message that we can kind of on some level relate to today, because it's about love and forgiveness. In fact, the key thing it really comes down to is that it's about granting people help and giving people care and forgiveness, and looking beyond that and believing that people can redeem themselves and people can become better and that people can genuinely want to change. So in many ways it has a lot of this social context which is very important and makes it a moralistic work. It is a film with a purpose. But beyond that, the Phantom Carriage also has this fantastic technical style. It has these fantastic effects for the 1920s with characters faded in over the opaque background. There's also a whole emphasis on colours. The nighttime scenes have this very blue tinge which is fantastic and produces some fantastic visuals. There's a very nice shots. One of my favourites involves a ghostly carriage over crashing waves. There's also just a lot of imagery regarding death, some gothic sensibilities, and also just generally silent movie sensibilities that you see in many of the silent films. As well as this, we also have the theme. So one of the big themes is the theme of change, and one of the big ways it manifests is death. Death is a massive concept in this film, with characters dying and with characters feeling like death is upon them, and characters literally being forced to reconcile that change between life and death and learning the ways that death can affect them. There's many ways that death affects the characters, some characters being murderers, other characters being victims, other characters being innocent victims, some being deserving victims. There's a whole range of people who death affects in this film, and we see the way that death enables change. It's not necessarily viewed as the end, but more the beginning of a point where someone can learn to change and improve. So death plays a very important aspect, and the visuals here are tinged with death. We have obviously the visual metaphors for death. We have images that are creaky and old. We have things that feel like they're dying. It's very much a film reliant on that death. We also have the recurrence of New Year's Eve, which is like the end of the year, which is the death and the rebirth, the transition, the change, which is another thing that emphasises the theme of change, which is so crucial to the Phantom Carriage. We also have other things here. So another thing here is disease, which is seen literally. We see disease being spread by one character deliberately and disease being spread around other people and the way that spreads, but we see that also metaphorically done through drunkenness. One drunkard seems to lead to another drunkard, and drunkenness seems to spread itself like a disease. We see a lot of other aspects of people trying to do good and it backfires. The idea that good can spread and someone being kind to someone else can lead to them being kind to others, but at times that journey seems difficult, it seems hard. Often people make mistakes along the way, and what might seem good can actually turn out to be bad. There's a lot of interesting nuances here, and the Phantom Carriage is certainly a very simple story at its heart. It certainly is a story which is ultimately this very simple redemption story. It's not necessarily a film which is incredibly deep, but it has a lot of ideas here that I think we can all find some sort of level of relevancy to, about trying to find the good side of someone and trying to make someone a better person, which is something that I think society probably does need to do and does need to validate and does need to work on and emphasise. But at the same time, the film is incredibly complex in the way it's narratively structured. It's told through flashbacks, it's told through, you know, sequences whose reality is a bit unearthly. We don't quite know how real things are. There's some scenes here which are incredibly influential. One scene in particular involved a man using an axe to get through a door to get to his wife and children, which obviously inspired Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. But in general, I think the fact that Carriage is just different for silent movies because its narrative is non-chronological and is complex and isn't just a simple, straightforward story. In fact, there's quite a lot of characters as well whose lives intersect and whose stories cross over. So there's a lot of ways here this is a bit more complex than the average silent film. This came out in 1921, so this isn't before what I think is the real high peak of silent cinema, which is really towards the back end, the late 20s, but it's really one of the finest films from its time and one of the very first masterpieces. I don't think I've seen a film older than it that I like more, and I think for that reason, the fact I just hold up as a classic. It's certainly a massively influential film in its scope and its legacy. It's solidified its director as one of the finest directors of the time, and it solidified this kind of cinema as a forebearer for future horror cinema and for future cinema in general. It's a real fantastic piece of work. It's important and innovative and interesting. It has quite a lot of depth for a film that is limited by its lack of sound and is limited just by what it can do visually, but that doesn't mean anything because visuals in a way mean way more than dialogue, etc. So it still works. I think it holds up. I like it. I enjoy it. I don't think it's necessarily scary, but it's definitely a bit of a spooky movie, and it has moments which are just a little bit eerie, and it is quite effective in getting the atmosphere it wants. It's certainly a moody film, and I think The Phantom Carriage is just one of those films that is absolutely a classic, and one of those films that I would thoroughly recommend just to anyone, especially anyone interested in old movies. So The Phantom Carriage is fantastic. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it if you've seen it, so please leave me a comment. If you like this video, please give it a like. If you want to hear more of my reviews, then please subscribe. If you want to read more of my reviews, you can follow me on Letterboxd or Twitter, links in the description, and thank you for watching.